A city is no place for a killer whale. But in January of 2002, 5 kilometers from Seattle, Washington, a young orca is sighted in Puget Sound. It seems to be about 2 years old, only a baby. The orca, or killer whales as they're commonly known, virtually never travel alone. This 570-kilogram baby is in a dangerous place, swimming in heavy boat and ferry traffic. Ken Balcom, a well-known whale biologist in the Seattle area, is one of the first on the scene to investigate.
This is a whale that had the great potential for just bonding to a human. If you were there, she'd come to you. You could slap the water, she'd slap her flipper. You could say roll over, she'd roll over.
But no one knows where this killer whale came from or why she is alone. Balcom has been keeping track of the orcas in these waters for 27 years. He knows every orca that lives here, but this one is a mystery. Somehow she's become separated from the rest of her family. First, Balcom needs to know where this lost young whale comes from. She could be from one of 3 very different populations of killer whales. One type are known as transients. These are the ocean's fiercest hunters, eating only marine mammals, including some species of whales. Transient killer whales travel up and down the Pacific coast of the United States and Canada. And there is one more possibility. These killer whales are called residents. They too travel up and down the coast, but return to the same feeding grounds every year. Through information gathered in Puget Sound, the baby is identified as Springer, a Canadian killer whale. Soon after, its identity is confirmed by Canada's leading killer whale experts. John Ford and Graham Ellis have been tracking and identifying orcas for over 30 years. Each year they head out into the Johnstone Strait to study killer whales.
This area right here in Johnstone Strait is probably the best easily accessible known location for viewing killer whales and studying them in the world. And as a result, most of what we know about killer whales scientifically has been learned with this population here and the sort of sister community, the southern residents off southern Vancouver Island.
Since 1973, these researchers have been taking mugshots of killer whales using dorsal fins to identify them. Dorsal fins are like fingerprints. Each fin has nicks and scrapes that are unique to each animal. Ellis and Ford's long-term killer whale study is probably the most detailed of its kind in the world. Ironically, killer whales aren't whales at all. They're dolphins, the largest of their kind. But they are deadly. They'll hunt fish, marine mammals, and even attack a bear or moose if it decides to swim too far from shore.
Just trying to see what groups are here. They're really spread out.
Who's that over there, Graham?
I think that's I-24 with their new calf and I-49, I believe.
This is A54 with her very first calf. And her mother, A30's grandmother's here as well. So you got 3 generations right here.
Killer whales travel in groups as large as 20 members. Ford and Ellis have discovered that each of these pods is actually an extended family.
Really, it took a number of years before it was clear that what we were dealing with here was a very unusual social system, strongly matrilineal in that every whale in the pod is actually descended from females in the group. So those big males are not the fathers of the offspring in the group. They're actually the grown-up sons of the mothers and the grandmothers in the group. They never leave the group. And this is what's so unusual about resident killer whales. It's a closed social system. The only way into one of these pods is to be born into it, and the only way out really is to die. I-33.
Yeah, she's surrounded.
Ford and Ellis know their killers well, and their expertise helped identify the mysterious orphan in Seattle.
It Took some time to sleuth out exactly who it was, but it turned out it was a young 2-year-old whale from a pod that we know very well, and her sort of popular name is Springer. And so this young whale seemed to have become orphaned. We think her mother died, and in that process she became separated from the rest of the matriline, the rest of the pod, and wandered around until she ended up in Seattle Harbor.
The news spreads fast, and Springer becomes an instant celebrity, making headlines and the 6 o'clock news. Everyone, it seems, wants to know about this abandoned baby. Experts at the Vancouver Aquarium are called in to help. The American government asks for advice from veterinarian Dr. David Huff, who also has extensive experience with killer whales.
About every 3 weeks or so, we would go down and go out in one of their boats and just kind of hang out with her.
Dr. Huff suspects that Springer is sick. The clue is her breath. It has an acetone odor called ketosis.
When you got anywhere near the blow from her exhalation and sniffed it, it was like opening a can of paint thinner.
Springer's bad breath might be caused by consuming her own body fat to survive, a sign that she could be starving. In Seattle, the environmental groups Orca Conservancy and the Earth Island Institute find the money to finance a rescue mission.
We're dealing with a wild animal. She's never been restrained before. She will resist. That's her natural reaction.
Springer is about to make history for her species and our own. By May, about 4 months after being discovered swimming alone in Puget Sound, it's clear that Springer, the orphan killer whale, needs to be rescued. The problem is how. Jeff Foster, the world's leading expert on capturing killer whales in the wild, is called in to help. Foster brings his team to Seattle to plan their strategy.
When you're dealing with live animals, and you never know how they're going to respond, and so it's important to have contingency plans.
Foster's first idea is to lure Springer into a canvas sling. It's tricky, like convincing a whale to put on a raincoat, but it's the easiest way to get her into a boat. Plan B is a giant underwater pen that can hold Springer if she refuses to swim into the sling. The challenge here is convincing her to swim inside.
This will hang down. It's 30 feet deep. We have a lead line on the bottom that weighs approximately 100 pounds. Now, it's light enough that she can lift that lead line up if she does get into one of the corners, so she can still take her breaths and everything. But when you put this much net in the water, there is that concern of it catching the currents like a sail and the stuff bagging. So the way they designed the net and hung the net, it should hang fairly straight in the water if we're at slack tides.
It will take a small army of scientists and support boats to capture Springer, plus a lot of money. But why does this killer whale deserve the royal treatment? Part of the answer is that killer whales have become a Hollywood icon, and in the Pacific Northwest especially, they're public animal number one.
Once considered vermin on this coast, these animals are now icons of the Wild West Coast, and people come from around the world to see them. They live in societies that are complex, and we can actually relate to them as being highly social mammals ourselves, where their young animals are tended by the adults in the group, and they have these very cohesive societies.
To the public, Springer is a baby in trouble. To scientists, she's the future of a species in trouble.
Starting in the mid-90s, things started to change. The southern residents first peaked and then started on a declining trend. More recently, the northern residents seem to have gone on a similar declining trend. And so this has kind of triggered a few alarm bells. Why are their numbers going down?
The killer whales living near Seattle are in trouble. 20% have died in the last 10 years, leaving a mere 84 orca. The northern residents off Vancouver Island have 200 members, but their population too is declining. Orca breed slowly, and today's losses could signify the beginning of the end. Ken Balcom has been watching the southern residents closely, and he doesn't like what he sees. Using photo identification, he has constructed a family tree of the southern residents.
We put up all the living whales, their photographs are here. And all these other spots are little tombstones of whales that were alive during the study but have died. This is one little mature line that's totally dead. There's another mature line up here that only has the grandma surviving. All the youngsters are dead. So what this story is saying is that there's a very high mortality of young and middle-aged animals that should not be occurring. We have the older animals that are still here. Something happened that has reduced their fertility and their immune response. They're just dying.
Balcom's data shows clearly that young orca like Springer are dying far too often, and being alone doesn't help.
We realized Springer's long-term survival chances were very, very poor, and that likely we would need to intervene and get her out of that area back to Johnson Strait up in this area, where she might have a chance of reintegrating with her pod or related pod.
In British Columbia, Springer would find more food, cleaner water, and a chance to reunite with her family. But to get there now, she'll have to be captured, treated, and released. To do that, Jeff Foster needs to earn her trust. He makes many trips out to visit Springer. It's like a courtship. Foster wants her to get to know the team, as well as the ropes he'll be using. The team gives Springer back rubs and hang the stretcher in the water, hoping she'll get used to it. But time is running out.
She was going in smaller and smaller area around the ferries, and we all felt it was just a matter of time before she got run over and either killed or badly injured.
Game plan is just trying to get everybody out as close as we can, then we'll go over and interact with her, and then start moving everything into position if we can.
Now, 6 months after Springer was discovered, Foster and his team are told to capture the orphan killer whale. They try a test run first to see if she's ready.
It's a great day. We've been really lucky with the weather pattern this time of year. Usually in Seattle in June, you can never depend on it at all. Conditions are right. Really, the only thing that's working against us right now is our tidal action. We have some of the lowest tides of the year, so that's going to work a little bit against us.
Foster decides to use Plan B and attempt to lure the baby killer whale into the net enclosure. It appears that the team's courtship has worked. Springer happily swims up to the underwater cage, but the baby orca is playing hard to get. She takes a quick look around and then changes her mind.
Yeah, I'm very happy that 2 different occasions she swam in and actually into the enclosure itself. It would have been pretty easy to put a tail line on her, but that's okay. I think there was so much activity around. She did cooperate. She did go inside the enclosure, and then she lost interest and left.
It's a good start, but to save Springer's life, the rescue team will need to try again. And the sooner, the better.